That was, of course, India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, who has officially presented the final budget of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. And this, of course, was the interim budget before India goes to polls in April or May this year to discuss whether what was announced was in line with expectations, the predictions. I have with me our business editor, Rahul, who is in the WION studio to discuss this and a lot more. Rahul, first things first, was it as expected?
Broadly, yes. The surprising part was the fiscal deficit target. It was expected to be about 5.4% for next year. That's lowered to 5.1%. It's very clear they're looking at fiscal discipline now. They're looking at lowering debt at any cost. And that's a broad takeaway, but broadly in line with what was expected.
Right,
overall.
and as I understand, there will be no change to taxation in the 2024 interim budget.
Yeah,
what are your thoughts on that?
That was expected as well,
Right.
because they really cannot make any significant changes. That's not what is done usually in the interim budget. This is only for the first 3 months, right? Before, until the elections and a new government is formed. So tax rates, nobody expected a change in the tax rates.
Right.
It'll come in the full budget.
Right. Let's talk about the focus in the finance minister's speech. As expected, the renewed focus on youth, the poor, farmers, and of course women. Your thoughts on that?
I think it's very similar to what they planned last year. I think the nuances that they have spoken about in this year in terms of specifications in allocations, I think that makes a slight difference. It looks like they're serious. Last year, there wasn't so much money allocated to their focus areas. But this year, it's clearly changing. They're looking at putting money into these sectors, into the focus areas. One of them is on youth, for example. They've increased allocations for skill development or for tech. So these are important takeaways from the budget.
Right, and also talking about the focus on women empowerment, she also mentioned that, the country cannot progress until we empower particular sections of society, be it the poor, be it the women and the youth. You mentioned the upskilling of youth. What about women empowerment? What was announced there?
I think the Nari Shakti concept as such, they are looking at improving allocation, skill development, also the direct money to women farmers. I think there'll be a change in that allocation right now. But I think the full budget will give you a better picture of this. At this point, it's just an announcement in the focus area. So we'll need to look at the numbers when the full budget comes out.
Yeah. Talking about the guiding principle that she mentioned, reform, perform, transform. Let's discuss that now.
Words,
Right.
broadly. I think in terms of growth, I think it's very clear. International bodies are accepting that India is the fastest growing, and India will be a $5 trillion economy in 2 years. 2047 plan, I think that is interesting at this point to make it a developed economy. There are lots of schemes that India has announced last year, which have been taken forward now in the interim budget. I think we'll need to wait for the full budget to see,
Right.
While the government is looking at cutting deficit, how are they going to boost growth and certain sectors? Where are they going to get the money from? Because that's the question that's not answered in this budget yet.
Right. In the lead up to the budget, we were talking about the focus on infrastructure spending, capital expenditure, which is needed, investing in India essentially. Was what was announced in line with what was expected?
Actually, better than that. So that's where the question comes. How are they going to maintain fiscal discipline while increasing capital expenditure? I think something that was missed was how are they going to improve or increase or get private investment into capex, the capital expenditure. How are they going to boost that? I didn't see any significant announcements on that, but I think that should come in the full budget again.
Right. Another significant announcement was that the government will now be launching a scheme to help the deserving sections of the middle class, as was earlier quoted by Prime Minister Modi.
See, I think if you look at the Niti Aayog data, it clearly speaks about how a larger population now is in the middle class at this point. So they had to address it at some point. The lower strata of the middle class, they had to address it. There are schemes. Will there be any tax breaks? I think that should help the lower strata as well, but that's not coming now. So again, I think this is broadly in line with the main themes and the direction of the government, but there are a couple of questions that we need to look at.
Right. If I may ask, what are those questions?
One is, how are they going to fund?
Right.
They have not spoken about disinvestment because they have not been able to match to the target that they have set over the last few years. And I think they are looking at that aspect to fund some of the schemes like we thought before the budget. Let's wait for the full budget on that.
Right. My colleague Vikram Chandra is also with us to talk about this. Vikram, what's your analysis, your wrap-up of the budget?
Well, the wrap-up essentially, Priyanka, is pretty much that as expected, you haven't deviated from the convention, which is pretty much not to do much. That's an interim budget. There was a very tantalizing statement that Nirmala Sitharaman said, when our government comes back, we will present a full budget in July. So that's essentially what the takeaway was. No change in taxation, no change in what's happening. A certain direction on the fiscal glide path was, of course, there, that there will be further consolidation. But essentially, it was a recitation of all the major things that have happened in the last few years and an indication of some potential focus areas going forward, tourism, infrastructure and the likes. But that is pretty much it, that, she's saying wait for the full budget, which will come in July. I think that was the sum and substance of it.
What about the focus on youth? I think that was one of the pillars of growth, as she mentioned, that the government will continue to focus on the youth, the poor, the farming community, and also women.
I think that's been part of what the Prime Minister has been saying, right? That there are only 4 castes and these are the 4 important castes. So, yes, specific measures were mentioned and a few individual proposals, Priyanka, were discussed and mentioned out there in each of those cases. But if people were thinking there's going to be some massive, dramatic announcement which is going to have, it's not been appropriate, it's not been the custom that you have something which is very election-oriented. So I don't think we had too much of that. Like in the review, economic review, there was a listing, of course, about all the successful things that the government has done, and you would expect that. There was also a listing, if you must have seen, about a number of other, the 4 castes was what you were referring to in each of those areas. But she did talk about the fact that getting growth to everybody is real secularism, in a sense, was one of the references she made. And then she spoke about some of the factors where she wanted development to happen, infrastructure, digital, GST, how all of those individual things are helping was something that she did draw everyone's attention to.
Right, Vikram, as you rightfully mentioned, she did talk about Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, which was the mantra, so to speak, of this budget. In your view, was this more of a report card of how the last 5 years have been?
Essentially, yes, right? Because if you take a look at it again, I'm coming back to elements of the review that was actually done a couple of days back, because we did hear elements of that. It's basically been reporting on a fact that India was in a situation of a certain amount of stress financially, talking about all the things that the government has done, talking about the actual steps that have been taken, and in particular drawing attention to areas like infrastructure. And let's face it, infrastructure, logistics, that has been areas in which a lot of very dramatic changes have taken place. A lot of dramatic progress has also been done over the last few years. So there was a clear reference to that. Also, you must have noticed that's one of the areas where a very clear outlay was mentioned, that 11.11 lakh crore rupee figure on infrastructure spending. Infrastructure clearly is something that the government continues to believe in. But there was a hint there, and more than a hint, there was an actual statement there that at some point you're going to start moving from the government doing all the heavy lifting and that, and the private sector has to come in and the private sector has to start spending. And therefore also talking about the fact that as fiscal prudence comes inside, government isn't borrowing that much. It frees up the space, Priyanka, for private sector to be able to get money. The fact that the banks are in a much better shape than they were in a few years ago, presumably also will help in that.
Dr. Vikas Singh, a senior economist. Vikas, we spoke before the budget was tabled. Now she has presented the budget. Your thoughts?
I think as expected, there's no big bang announcement. But I think it's online with what we've been expecting, in the sense that she promised that there's going to be continuity when they come back to power. I think sometimes it's also a good idea to just leave things as it is. My only disappointment has been that we expected some minor changes for the MSME sector because they are really the drivers of not only the growth but also the drivers of the economy. Close to about 70% of all jobs that exist in India is provided by the MSME sector.
Right.
Most of our viewers will not be disappointed to know that most of these employees, 80% of those employees employed in the MSME sector make less money than even the per capita income. So there is certainly something that needed to be done for the MSME sector. I hope 4 months down the line, when they come back, we can probably expect a far more comprehensive announcement for the MSME sector. I'm also happy that she talked about, and I think the most defining statement from the Finance Minister was that we don't focus on the outlay, we focus on the outcome. That has been the characteristic of the government, and we just hope they maintain that.
Absolutely. Right. Dr. Singh, thank you for that. In fact, let's now go over to Vikram Chandra to decode the budget with more expert analyses. Over to you, Vikram.
Thanks a lot, Priyanka. I think one of the interesting things, of course, about the fact that it was an interim budget was the length of it, right? We normally have budget speeches for about 2 hours. This was over and out in 1 hour flat. So lots and lots of guests are going to continue to come in as I speak. We'll keep on going to them. But let me start with Jayant Krishna, who's with our CEO, Foundation for Advancing Science and Technology, and at the CISS. Jayant, your sense of that overall interim budget, some of the directional elements that you did speak about, what do you make of them?
Yeah, so Vikram, I think it's a business as usual, and it is the interim budget in the true sense. Perhaps one of the shortest budget speeches of any finance minister, less than an hour. And I think there are no surprise elements at all. And I think one good, while a lot of individuals, the huge middle class, which constitutes a huge voter base, there was a motivation for her to announce some personal tax benefits in terms of slab rationalization, higher standard deduction, and so on and so forth. That didn't happen. That was surely a step in the right direction. And overall tax regime, direct, indirect, everything, nothing changes, which is long term. If you look at, that's good for one simple reason, because the investors all over the world now look at some kind of a regulatory certainty that they want to experience while engaging with India, And too many changes, big ticket changes, especially in the tax regime, both direct and indirect, is not to their liking. So I think that's something good in the budget. Other couple of things which I saw, a huge focus on infrastructure that she laid in terms of tripling it in the last 4 years of this government. And also a huge, in a budget year when, fiscal prudence is very important. I think on already a big base, if you announce 11.1% increase on infra spend, which amounts to 3.4% of the GDP, I think that's a pretty impressive, pretty good. But one thing which I see loud and clear, which is a significant change and a new item, brought on the table by Nirmala Sitharaman, is on research and development. We all know, India as a country, we spend just about 0.7% of our GDP on scientific research and development, which is far lower than most developed countries in the world. So I think there she has talked about rupees 1 lakh crore kind of a corpus to be created, and which will be available even for private sector for R&D projects, the way I understood, right. And both for long-term financing as well as short-term financing, and it will have either very low or negligible or nil rate of interest. So I think now private sector can invest in R&D without bothering on the cost of borrowing that money for research and development, because they can always take these loans from this corpus.